Welcome to Independent Aircraft Investigations. My name is Richard Godfrey. Today we're going to focus on your comments and questions about MH370. We have received well over 1,000 comments and questions. My personal thanks for the many kind words of appreciation and gratitude for the new channel. Many thanks to those who have subscribed. Comments are welcome in any language, but please do try to avoid one language, though, and that is bad language. Brett J2643, many thanks, Richard. In one comprehensive program, you bring together the key elements of all currently available analysis of evidence relating to the MH370 flight. A very impressive and important broadcast. Yeah, many thanks, Brett. I thought it was important to bring together all the evidence from 10 different sources in one place in one episode. We covered the 7-hour, 37-minute flight, and in particular, we focused on the final phase after the aircraft ran out of fuel. At Scott Pugsley, calling off the search for MH370 seems to suggest that the Whisper area identified by you guys was not considered a reasonably promising location to justify the cost and effort to search there. Can you provide any insight into that decision? Does someone have something against you? What do others say is wrong with your conclusions? Best wishes. The current search for MH370 was called off because of the weather in the southern Indian Ocean. Ocean Infinity listened carefully to a number of analysts, including the Independent Group and Captain Patrick Blelly and Jean-Luc Marchand. And my co-author, Professor Simon Maskell, attended the meeting between Ocean Infinity, the Malaysian Minister of Transport, and representatives of the MH370 families. And Whisper was discussed at length. And what others point out when they say my conclusions are wrong, number one, I work for the Malaysian government or the CIA, and I'm part of a plot and a cover-up. Number two, I'm not an aerospace engineer and I am a fraud. Number three, Whisper is designed for another purpose and not for detecting and tracking aircraft. They claim that the inventor of Whisper says it cannot be used for detecting and tracking aircraft. They claim that the signals are too weak to travel around the globe. They claim that anomalies in signal strength and signal frequency are too small to be detected above the noise levels. They claim it is impossible to know which aircraft caused an anomaly because there are so many aircraft in the air at any one point in time. But in fact, you can leave out Whisper from the 10 groups of evidence I presented, and it would not change my conclusion. At Michael Chapman, do people think first world countries who lost citizens can afford to fund ongoing searching by OI, or that they should? Well, Michael, aviation supports an estimated $4.1 trillion. That's 3.9% of the global GDP in economic activity worldwide, including direct, indirect, induced, and catalytic effects. including tourism and trade. If aviation were a country, its economic contribution would rank roughly as the 20th largest economy in the world. I do not believe that we can afford not to solve the mystery of the disappearance of MH370 and ensure that such an event never happens again. At Bipolar Bear 9917, was Zaharie Ahmad Shah internet history analyzed or investigated? That would be another data set that might provide a few clues. Well, we have analyzed the internet history of Captain Zaharie Shah, which is detailed in the Royal Malaysian Police Report. He had several internet and email accounts with Facebook, WeChat, YouTube, Twitter, Google, Hotmail. There are a number of red flags, but nothing that is directly relevant to the plausible hypothesis presented. And we have discussed these red flags on Daily Airline News. At Be Joyful, Richard, overwhelmed by your detailed presentation and thank you for the significant time required. Could pilot Ahmed Shah's speech disfluency, his error in flight number, and unnecessary and non-standard transmission calls have been a code for help? Well, be joyful. The code for help is to set the transponder squawk code either to 7500, which means emergency, 7600, which means radio failure, or 7700, which means hijacking. The solution is not to switch the transponder to standby. Of course, a hijacker could switch the transponder to standby, but then you are flying dark and no other aircraft can detect you on their traffic collision and avoidance system. You are taking an unnecessary risk. G. Lizzie McGee. To me, the first thing that jumped out in the ATC audio was his lack of interest in the Vietnamese frequency. I don't think he had any intention of ever going to that channel. And very shortly thereafter, the plane changed course and vanished. Well, Lizzie, the aircraft does have 3 VHF radios, 2 HF radios, a sat phone, a CPD-LC, the controller pilot data link communications, ACARS, the aircraft communication addressing and reporting system, and 2 transponders. And there was no response from the aircraft via radio or satellite, either by voice or data or code, using any of these 10 systems. At Sherma posted a long comment and raised 3 key issues. Number 1, intentional depressurization via a high altitude climb to 45,000 feet. Secondly, a selective survival of only 1 cellular signal at 23,000 feet. And finally, the possible systematic removal or shielding of all passenger phones. Sherma considers the reported climb to 45,000 feet, based on the Malaysian primary radar data, to be one of the strongest indicators of deliberate intent. And the big question, why was only 1 phone detected in Penang? There were 239 passengers and crew on board. In 2014, studies suggested 20 to 30% of passengers left phones powered on, even if told to switch them off or use flight mode. And Schirmer proposes the following sequence. The aircraft climbs to 45,000 feet to induce hypoxia, incapacitating passengers. During the subsequent descent, someone uses a personal oxygen bottle, engages the autopilot, and systematically walks through the cabin and turns off or collects all the passenger phones, and possibly uses improvised shielding, for example, aluminium foil from the galley supplies. And he may have missed the co-pilot's phone if it was inaccessible. For example, the co-pilot was locked in the lavatory. And the commenter suggests this could explain why only one device connected. And that brings us to the central question, why only one phone ping? In my view, much of the argument relies on assumptions about radar precision and assumptions about passenger phone usage and speculative cabin phone collection or shielding activity during a narrow time window. Primary radar only measures the range and the bearing. It does not measure altitude. It does not measure the slant angle between the radar and the aircraft. It can easily be out by as much as plus minus 5,000 feet. The official report includes several statements. The military data also recorded a significant height variation from 31,150 feet to 39,116 feet. And again, and I quote, the height of this blip was recorded between 24,450 feet and 47,500 feet. And another excerpt, at 17:52:31 UTC, the blip was observed to be at 10 nautical miles south of Penang Island on a heading of 261 degrees and a speed of 525 knots, and at a height of 44,700 feet. Now, we do not have the military raw primary radar data, but we do have the raw civilian primary radar data and all of the range and bearing data. We know that at 17:20:35 UTC, MH370 was at 35,000 feet. And that's when we had the last few ADS-B data items. And if we assume the diversion started immediately after this point in time, and the aircraft remained at 35,000 feet throughout, then the 290 radar data points from Kota Bharu and from Butterworth show a ground speed of 522 knots, plus or minus 97 knots. And that is quite a variation. If we assume, on the other hand, that the diversion started immediately after 17:20:35, but the aircraft climbed to 45,000 feet at, say, 750 feet per minute, and then stayed at 45,000 feet for 6 minutes, and then started a descent at 2,000 feet per minute to reach 20,000 feet by 17:52:27 UTC, when the FO's mobile phone was detected over Penang. Then the 290 radar data points from Kota Bharu and Butterworth show a ground speed of 527 knots, plus or minus 99 knots. Again, a very large variation. So in my view, both scenarios are feasible. The Royal Malaysian Police ran tests with various mobile phones at various altitudes over Penang. Only one mobile phone connected at 20,000 feet. The others would not connect reliably above 8,000 feet. They tried a mobile phone from the captain and the same make and model from the co-pilot. In my view, what is not feasible is that the hijacker left the cockpit with a portable oxygen bottle and checked 239 crew and passengers to ensure that all their mobile phones were either off or he placed them in an aluminium foil bag. Let me explain. We can constrain MH370's altitude at 1752.27 UTC, the time of the first officer's BlackBerry 9790 handset detection by the Cellcom network at BB Falim 2 base station on Penang Island. The known parameters, the horizontal distance from the BB Falim 2 to the aircraft was 25,205 meters, and the base station antenna height is 26 meters above mean sea level. And there is a hill along the azimuth of 210 degrees true from the base station towards the aircraft at a distance of 3,250 meters horizontally, with an elevation of 382 meters above mean sea level. That means the minimum elevation angle required to clear terrain is 6.25 degrees. And therefore, the minimum aircraft height above the antenna is 2,762 meters. And if you add the antenna height, you get 2,788 meters, and that makes 9,150 feet above mean sea level. And if you assume a practical upward serving envelope of 10 degrees, then you arrive at an altitude of the aircraft of 14,600 feet above mean sea level. If a climb to flight level 450 occurred, descent must have been underway by approximately between 1734 and 1737 UTC at least 2,000 feet per minute. This severely limits any possible level time at flight level 450. So coming back to the question, why only one phone detection amongst 239 people, given that the aircraft was likely in the 9,000 to 15,000 feet range, this outcome is compatible with GSM 3G timing and range limits. It also compatible with the terrain screening geometry, the fuselage attenuation, and marginal uplink success for only one handset. If the aircraft descended from flight level 450, from 45,000 feet down to 9,000 feet at 2,000 feet per minute, takes 18.5 minutes. And from 45,000 feet down to 20,000 feet takes 12.5 minutes. And with 239 persons on board and between 750 and 1,110 seconds total time to search the cabin, the available time per person is between 3.1 and 4.6 seconds per person. And this excludes walking time and searching overhead bins. So my conclusion, a systematic phone collection or verification operation is implausible. The Penang location-based system detection geometrically brackets MH370 at approximately 9 to 15,000 feet at 1752.27 UTC. And this is inconsistent with flight level 450 at that moment in time. It also conflicts with the official report and the military radar observations. Any prior flight level 450 excursion must have ended by 1734 to 1737 under a 2,000 feet per minute descent assumption. Civilian primary surveillance radar does not independently validate a 45,000-foot climb. The single phone detection is compatible with normal cellular and RF constraints. The hypoxia cabin phone sweep hypothesis is not supported by timing or workload feasibility. Now, at Canis Cava, has Captain Sahari's flight simulator route been searched by Ocean Infinity? The flight simulator route was based on a fuel load of 68,524 kilo for a flight MH370 from Kuala Lumpur to Jeddah. MH370 only had a fuel load of 49,100 kilo for a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The flight simulator route is in the same direction to the southern Indian Ocean, but goes much further with the additional 19,424 kilo of fuel. The flight simulator route is not exactly comparable and has therefore not been searched. At Canis Cava came back and said, but the heading, or what you call it, might be the same. Maybe somewhere along that route he ditched it. And it's a very good point. And in fact, I wrote a paper together with Victor Iannello, dated the 24th of August 2016, where we calculated the flight simulator route and where MH370 would end up along that route at fuel exhaustion, due to the fact it only had 49,100 kilos of fuel. And the path crosses the seventh arc, the point of fuel exhaustion, near 26.9 degrees south and 100.6 degrees east. The 9-page paper is titled Possible Flight Path of MH370 Towards McMurdo Station, Antarctica, by Victor Iannello and Richard Godfrey, August 24, 2016. And I've included a link in the description below. In the last 10 years, since writing that paper, both Victor Iannello and I have come a long way in our investigations of MH370. And I'm not sure whether either of us would still fully endorse the paper from 2016. But we leave it to the reader, if you're interested, to review and come to your conclusion. At Urban Satirist, it was reported that the flight carried 20 employees from Freescale Semiconductor, a US technology firm. There were also claims about patents or cloaking technology in an experimental phase being implemented into silicon chips at facilities in Tianjin in China and Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And Freescale confirmed that 20 of its employees were confirmed passengers on MH370. There were 12 from Malaysia and 8 from China. The company said at the time that the entire Freescale community was deeply saddened by the news and that it was continuing to monitor the situation and share information as it became available. Greg Lowe, Freescale's president and CEO back then, stated, "At present, we are solely focused on our employees and their families. Our thoughts and prayers are with those affected by this tragic event." Freescale also arranged around-the-clock support and counseling for affected staff and families through its employee assistance program. Reuters reported on the 9th of March 2014, 20 employees of US chipmaker Freescale Semiconductor were passengers on a Malaysia Airlines flight presumed to have crashed off the Vietnamese coast, according to a company statement on Saturday. The employees, among 239 people on the plane, included engineers and manufacturing staff, many of whom travel regularly between company facilities in Tianjin, China, and Kuala Lumpur, a company source said. In March 2015, a year after the accident, NXP Semiconductors and Freescale Semiconductor announced a merger agreement under which NXP would acquire Freescale in a transaction valued at roughly $40 billion, including debt. The deal did not close until December 2015 because it required shareholder approval and antitrust clearance across multiple jurisdictions, including the United States, the European Union, China, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and others. A standard but lengthy process for a large global semiconductor merger. And both companies had overlapping businesses in automotive microcontrollers, MCUs, in RF and mixed signal chips, and embedded processors. China approved the deal only in November 2015 after conducting an extended antitrust review as the combination of NXP Semiconductors and Freescale Semiconductor would create one of the world's largest suppliers of automotive embedded semiconductors, and particularly in automotive MCUs. At Frigatebird 4873, good day, Richard. Big fan of the show and really appreciate all your contributions to MH370 related analysis and discussion. Assuming the Inmarsat data is accurate and the plane crashed somewhere along the southern 7th arc, even a textbook ditching or catastrophic mid-air breakup and subsequent impact with the ocean surface should have produced enough impact energy to be detected by multiple hydrophones. Yet the only candidate, MH370 signal, comes from the H01 West at Cape Lewin. Could the absence of signals at Diego Garcia and other stations really only be explained by noise issues like air horn interference? Or does it suggest something more fundamental about the impact scenario? Do you believe the signal with a 306-degree bearing detected by HO1W is actually from MH370? If not, what, in your view, could plausibly explain the lack of any definitive acoustic signature? Thank you, Richard, and look forward to your next episode. Curtin University concluded that the 306-degree true signal was triangulated between Cape Lewin and Scott Reef and likely originated in the Carlsberg Ridge and was a natural geological seismic event. And I agree with their assessment. There are many possible sources of underwater acoustic detections. We've cited ice events in the Antarctica, earthquakes, underwater volcanoes, and other seismic and man-made airgun events for survey work. It is perfectly possible that there was an acoustic event matching the impact of MH370, but the signal did not stand out from the noise on the 11 sensors in 5 different locations. If Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 had suffered a high-altitude breakup before ocean contact, the physics changes dramatically. Instead of one large impact, you get hundreds of smaller impacts spread in space and time. And that produces 3 important effects. Number one, temporal smearing. The debris arrives over minutes, not over milliseconds. Number 2, massive reduction in peak amplitude. Hydroacoustic detectability depends strongly on peak pressure, not total energy. And number 3, poor acoustic coupling. Many fragments entering at shallow angles may well have decelerated in the air before impact. This severely weakens coupling into the SOFAR channel compared with a steep, intact fuselage impact. Instead of a clean spike, you get a low-level, incoherent broadband noise extended over tens of seconds to minutes and spatially diffuse. This is extremely hard to distinguish from seismic events, ice noise, or even distant storms. This aligns with why Curtin University concluded that the candidate signals were most consistent with geological sources and not an aircraft impact. And Rick FZ1 asks, is there any possibility that someone might have found the wreckage and retrieved the CVR FDR, perhaps in order to avoid or conceal or shift the blame? Are we reasonably certain that nobody has found or picked up items of wreckage, except, of course, the stuff found in Eastern Africa and on the islands in the Indian Ocean? A small minority of the wreckage will float, and around 60 items have been found. A large majority of the wreckage will sink and end up in a limited area on the sea floor. When we find the seafloor wreckage site, it will be documented in detail. Each item found on the seafloor will be listed, and its exact seafloor location, its state, and likely provenance on the aircraft. If there are items of debris missing that would normally expect to find on the sea floor, then the speculation, Rick FZ1, that you have may well be proven true. Personally, I think if someone knows where the wreckage of MH370 is, then they would not be able to keep that information to themselves. You need quite sophisticated equipment to be able to find and retrieve the FDR and CVR and any other evidence. You also need an ocean-going ship and a team of people for such a project. I am sure your scenario would soon become public knowledge. And at Matt Phillips, 3288, is it possible for a powerful intelligence agency to manipulate IMASAT data? The IMASAT data is stored and forwarded to multiple databases in near real time. And the databases at IMASAT, at CETA, at various airlines, aircraft manufacturers, and engine manufacturers. It becomes a huge task to track and modify all copies of the raw data. It becomes impossible to track and modify all copies of this data after it has been leaked. At William Sharp, 5973, yep, but it need not be perfect, just successful. Cockpit crew of one, sudden blow to the head. The FedEx DC-10 Flight 705 event could have been successful had there only been one pilot and one actor. The fact is, they had three crew on board, plus the one actor, and he was nearly successful. Passengers likely could not have entered or broken into the cockpit quickly enough to overcome the sudden loss of cabin pressure and oxygen, and going on what little time of oxygen they might have left. Cabin crew as well, in part because probably they would have been trained to initially react to what they thought was an emergency and not for what is actually happening in the cockpit. A bit of aggressive maneuvering might help them throw people off balance long enough. I've considered this scenario because it helps explain why the actor went to so much trouble. He could have dumped the aircraft at low altitude. He could have done something similar to what I suggest a lot sooner, including in deep water. So why bother with flying so long and so far just to dump the aircraft and himself? It's not as though it was scenic on the way. And just to cover up what? Question mark. So I'm postulating he had a different motive, living, not suicide, and doable, executable plan he felt would work. This could be dead wrong and challenging, but not impossible. Again, the fact that he believed he had a good chance of pulling it off is what counts. We don't know if he's dead or alive. Let's say probably dead. You have very convincingly shown what is known to have happened, or very probably happened. What part of this could not be accomplished by one person, up to the surviving part? Could what I have suggested not been done by one person, acting alone, at least as far as we're concerned about the aircraft? Perhaps someone in the cabin acted with him. Nothing to suggest that so far. But if you carry out the what ifs, one person acting alone, or maybe one other with him. I'm not hearing that this is impossible. I'm hearing it's not perfect. In any case, thanks for all you have done and continue to do, so much as always. Well, you put your finger on the one weak point in my plausible hypothesis, survivability. If your intention is to fly 7 hours, 37 minutes and ditch the aircraft and survive, then you have to be rescued. You have to make sure you can ditch the aircraft successfully. The waves and swell were between 2.5 meters, 8.2 feet, and 4.6 meters, 15.1 feet. And you cannot rendezvous with a boat waiting because that would be investigated. You have to hope that there was a passing vessel that will hear your mayday call and pick you up. The sea state does not make a survivable ditch scenario impossible, but it makes it operationally irrational as a survival plan. The DSTG descent rates of between 13,800 and 25,300 feet per minute are not controlled ditching descent profiles. They are consistent with spiral dive, high energy impact, and loss of control. Although Boeing did show that a 15,000 feet per minute dive is recoverable. But the basic question is, if survivable was the objective, why choose one of the most remote oceanic regions on Earth? But if disappearance was the objective, then a remote oceanic region is optimal. And those two goals conflict. In my view, the primary objective was to prevent recovery of the aircraft and its recorders, maximize the probability that the main wreckage remains undiscovered indefinitely. The secondary objective was to avoid early localization, minimize probability of near-term search and rescue convergence. And the tertiary objective was to preserve ambiguity and leave no clues, prevent any single explanation from becoming dominant without wreckage. The bottom line, once you frame MH370 as optimization for disappearance and not survival, the evidence stops fighting itself. Remote ocean makes sense. Sea state becomes irrelevant. High rate of descent becomes useful. Lack of mayday becomes expected. Partial debris becomes sufficient. And ambiguity becomes a feature. Was the terminal phase optimized for maximum ambiguity or maximum sink rate of the debris? Was there an active pilot after the onset of end-of-flight instability, after fuel exhaustion and the SDU reboot window? Under a disappearance first objective function, the terminal signatures are most consistent with a sink-dominant end state. Ambiguity is therefore not a separate goal, but the predictable consequence of successful non-recovery. MH370's terminal phase evidence currently optimizes for sink and not survival. And finally, from Phil Bartlett, 7898. Absolutely fascinating program, Richard, but I'm afraid you lost me. I will still follow you, however. Phil, yeah, sometimes I can understand if you get lost, but feel free to question what I say until you get a satisfactory answer that you are happy with. So that's all we have time for today, but please do keep those fantastic questions and comments coming. And we'll have another session next week with some more viewers' questions and comments. Meanwhile, please subscribe to our channel to ensure future investigations, and join us on Friday when we will look at the Air India crash, Flight 171. Thank you very much for watching. and have a good day.